different things just to practice the new self, right? Yeah. Change the wiring in here.
Change the wiring. Great. That's exactly what it is.
Mhm.
It's exactly.
We're always exploring, we're always seeking, and I think, just taking the fear out of seeking and allowing ourselves to go in the direction that spirit is flowing, that spirit is calling and leading us, and that's the beauty of everything that we're
And
here to do is remember who we are. That's what Jesus, to me, that's what Jesus came down here to show us who we are.
yeah, yeah. And it's okay too, because sometimes people we just were talking about the fear thing. It is okay to go in a direction and then hit and feel a little bit nervous or anxious about that and come back. And then maybe either go, if it really felt like, okay, this isn't the right way, go in a different direction, or just give yourself time to integrate what you've learned.
Welcome to the Light the Day podcast, where we explore spiritually transformative experiences. Today, I am so excited to have on the show Pooja Chilukuri and Bernadette Thompson. And both of you have been on the show before, and today we have a special topic, a panel discussion. So, Pooja, if you want to start, just introduce yourself briefly, and then we'll have Bernadette introduce herself, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me on, Julie. It's a pleasure to be back. My name is Pooja Chilukuri, and I am joining this podcast today from the East Coast, North Carolina. I've been here last 32 years. I love it. I call it home. I grew up in India. I'm a nutritional therapy practitioner. I've written some books, and I'm a podcast host. And I'm so grateful to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be a lot of fun. Thank you so much for joining us. We were just talking about how we're kind of spread across the country. I'm in Nashville, you're in North Carolina. And then Bernadette, introduce yourself and where you're joining us from.
So I am Bernadette Thompson. I am joining you from Los Angeles, which is new for me. I'm an East Coast girl who's now in LA. I am an ancestral healer, a grief and spiritual coach and teacher. And my company is Tell Me Our Story, Ancestral Healing. And I share that because it's from the point of view of the child asking the parent to tell me our story so that we all understand our ancestral background.
Awesome. So the reason we're having this discussion today is because we all connected, met each other at the IONS conference last year, which is the International Association of Near-Death Studies. They had a conference in Phoenix last year. This year it's going to be in Chicago. But I met you guys, and we all three of us have a story of spirituality and religion that's a little bit different and also a little bit similar. And so I wanted to have this discussion about spirituality beyond religion. And maybe I'll start with you, Bernadette. If you'll share with us just briefly kind of your religious background and how that has, briefly how that's informed your spiritual experience.
That's such a great, this is such a great discussion to have. My background, my maiden name is Bernadette Margaret Teresa O'Brien. So I am an Irish Catholic. I grew up with 7 brothers and sisters, and we were steeped in the Catholic Church. I grew up where my dad was, president of the Dad's Club, president of the Holy Name Society. He was the head lector, all of these deep church things. And our church and our school were connected by the parking lot. So I went to the Catholic church and to the Catholic school all the way from kindergarten through high school.
Wow.
So, and actually I went to a Catholic college as well. At that point, my parents wanted us to go Catholic all the way through schools. And So I was brought up in the catechism, and which is very important because the Catholic, especially the church that I grew up in, we were taught, we weren't taught a lot of Bible stories. We were taught catechism, which is being taught how to be a good Catholic and
Mm,
understanding, making sure that we knew all the prayers and we knew the saints and we knew the holy days and what they meant. So that's a lot of where my where my beginnings were. I mean, everything that I learned as a young child came through the lens of the Catholic Church. And all of my, I remember being in kindergarten and first grade, being really, really little. And everything was taught through you have to be following, doing it the way God wants you. And the only way God, you can only get to heaven through being a Catholic. I mean, that's really what they were teaching us, us at the time. And yeah, I mean, there's so much more I could add. I don't know if you want me to tell a longer story or just have us
yeah,
each kind of.
yeah, I love that introduction because that really paints a picture
Mhm,
for what your experience was growing up and what your training was as far as your religious training. Pooja,
mhm.
I'd love to ask you the same question. I know you have a very diverse religious background, so share a little bit about your religious background.
Sure, Julie. I grew up in India, and my name is a very, very traditional Hindu name. So I grew up very entrenched in Hinduism. But my family was very open. So in Hinduism, we don't have just one book or one set of rules. It's very diverse because there are several different gods and several different philosophies. So it's almost like, there's compilation of like philosophy upon philosophy. So my family, I just followed whatever they followed. I remember having a temple inside my home. And my name, Pooja, also means rituals and worship, and it's a very, very traditional Hindu name. So growing up, I mean, from the minute I was born, there was no option but to believe in not just one God, but several gods, right? So this temple inside my home was filled with different deities, and my earliest childhood memories are of my dad. He would just say these prayers for almost an hour or two every morning. And
Wow,
when
what
he rang that
dedication.
bell, yeah, so he would ring a little bell, like he'd just go ding, ding, ding. And that was my signal I need to get out of bed.
Oh,
But that was him ending his prayers. So Hinduism was one dominant force in my life. But then my dad had Muslim friends. He had a really good Christian friend. So this person had some influence over me because every Easter he would bring us this giant Easter egg which was covered in chocolate and there was candy inside. And Christmas he would take my dad to church. So I remember putting up Christmas trees even as a Hindu. So I was exposed a little bit, but I had no idea about the depths of these religions. We just went along with, whatever our family and friends were celebrating. And then also in Calcutta, you have the Catholic Church. Bernadette, Mother Teresa did a lot of her work there. So we were familiar with the concepts of these religions, but I practiced as a Hindu.
mm. And then I know things changed when you moved to the United States, and we'll put links to the previous interviews with Bernadette and Pooja both, so you can get the fuller story of, some other aspects. But when you moved to the States, you were ill and you had this experience in the Christian church, and that kind of shifted things again. You want to go ahead and share a little bit about that experience
Sure,
as well?
yes. So I did move to the United States in 1992, and I was straight out of high school, and that was the time that I gotten sick with something that no one could diagnose. So for about 2 years, I got so sick that I was wasting away. And then one of my dad's friends, he suggested I come here and they do some research and try to help me at Duke University, which had a huge medical center, still has a huge medical and research center. One thing led to another, and I actually healed by just a prayer of faith that was just prayed by two or three people that prayed over me. And they prayed in Jesus' name. So, this was very, very interesting to me because I had gone to all the gods I knew. I'd been on a pilgrimage. I tried every avenue of spirituality to get healing. And here it is that they just said the name of Jesus and I healed spontaneously. So that really triggered me to pursue it, to find out more about the Christian religion. And so that's when things shifted for me. And I actually remember calling home and telling my parents that I wanted to become a Christian, like officially. So that conversation was very interesting.
Yeah. 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 And then you stayed in the Christian church for 17 years. And was it in the Christian church that you were a part of? I know it was a smaller church. Was it part of a denomination? Was it non-denominational or?
Yeah, so they went by that they were non-denominational. That's what they said. But the leaders were trained in the Southern Baptist seminaries.
Okay. Okay.
So I think they did influence that.
Yeah.
And they were evangelical. And also, I consider them fundamentalists because for them, every word in the Bible was inerrant and you could not deviate from it at
Mm,
all. So, this is the type of church where you have to have a Bible verse for everything. If
mm,
you can't find a Bible verse, then you can't do it, or you can't even think it. So, very strict. That's how I experienced it.
yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that background. Really, it's always fascinating to me to learn about all of us, right? All of us in our different backgrounds, and and we can see how where we were born and when we were born and what family we were born in influences our religious upbringing and influences our life. I was raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, commonly called the Mormon Church. It's a very, I would call it a very fundamental religion in that we had very specific creeds. Like Bernadette, you talked about, like, you learned how to do it the Catholic way, and that was certainly the case in my Mormon upbringing and my Mormon adulthood. It was like you learned how to do it the Mormon way. And as a member of the LDS Church, I considered myself a Christian because I fully believed in Jesus. I loved Jesus. I loved the stories of Jesus. Um, I was very knowledgeable about the New Testament and those stories, and felt very connected to that. In the LDS faith, they also have additional scripture. And the additional scripture also speaks of Jesus, tells stories of Jesus, and stories of Jesus as from the point of view of North America before, like, pre-Columbus America. And so it's really a fascinating thing. But I was very much like, I was raised in that. I was, my father didn't really have any religion, and he didn't while I was growing up. But my mom was very devout, and her family was very devout. And I saw in their families, I saw my mom's family thriving and really doing well, and hearing the stories of, like, before they had joined the Mormon church versus after. And I was the fourth generation in that faith in my family. And then I saw my dad's family really kind of struggling. And so I looked at it and I thought, by their fruits ye shall know them, right? And so I was like, okay, this is what I want. And so I stayed in that faith for many, many years. So I all three of us have deconstructed our previous religious background and have found spirituality in a different container, in a different experience, in a more personal experience. But I would love for you to share what things that you took from religion that has really been, what were the good things, what were the things that you just loved about your faith and your growing up in those experiences. And I know, Pooja, this might be a little complicated for you because you have this very diverse background, but I would love for you to start just kind of talking about some of the things that you're just really grateful to have learned in with your religious background.
Sure, Julie. I think religion taught me to, just appreciate community. I think this was common between both Hinduism and the Christian church that I was going to. And it was also a lot of fun for the parts that were not stressful. Like, if you leave out the doctrines and the dogmas and the traditions that we're forced to follow, there was a lot of fun stuff too, like with festivals and celebrations. And, even whether as a Hindu or whether as a Christian, in Christian church, I remember like every Sunday, the potlucks, like those are core memories, right? Like they are happy memories. So they always make me smile. And I also feel like religion gave me a gift because I feel like in this world, I've never wanted to be by myself, right? Completely alone, especially for things that I had no control over. So I think having faith helped me. It's helped me through some very dark times. And I think that is still something that I continue to practice just as a personal faith, because I really feel like we all need a friend and we all need hope. So those are some things that I took away that I still cherish.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
Bernadette, what about your experience? And
Well,
and can I ask, how long were you active or were you participating Catholic?
that's a really interesting question. So I would say that through my college years, I was going to church all the time because we had, when I was in college, we had church downstairs, and the priests were young, and and it was a Catholic college, so they knew how to talk to young Catholic college students. But it was after that, when I had the ability to make my own decision, that I started to move away from it. But I always had one foot in, because all of our family traditions, anybody, marriage and anything, was always at the Catholic Church. So I was still connected, particularly to the church that I grew up in, because it was part of me. Like it was Church of the Resurrection, Resurrection School, the Academy of the Resurrection. I mean, that's where I came from. So, talking about it, there's a little bit of there was a pride in that, because it was a very Catholic community. So there was a pride in being that close to the church. And we knew the priests and the nuns. I remember as a child going, trick-or-treating at the convent and sitting on the nuns' laps. I mean, that's what it was steeped in. But I think what I took, one of the things that I took uh, was just to be loving and kind to others. And that's always been deep in who I am. But along with that came, you are only supposed to give, you're not supposed to receive. Like,
Mm,
which was something that I took to heart very much. But the other thing, when I was little, my mom used to say to me, whenever you're scared, to ask the Blessed Mother to come to you. The
mm,
Blessed Mother is a big part of the Catholic Church and a big part of the Rosary, which we'll talk about after, how that came back to me. So I would wake up, if I had a nightmare, I would wake up and ask for Mary. I would ask her to come to me. And then my nightmare would go away, my fear would go away. And so that is one of the beautiful things that when I look back, besides the community of being being part of it. But we didn't have those potluck suppers very often, or though we didn't, everybody after mass got out of there. It was like, get out, parking lot empty. So we didn't have that kind of community thing, but there was community. And I think always bringing Mary to me was something that I kept with me.
Yeah, thank you. I have to echo what you guys shared, because for me too, it was community, it was and for me, it was like that early education in God and spirituality, never feeling alone, always feeling like I could call on God if there was, if I was scared, like you're talking about, Bernadette, always never feeling alone, always feeling like God was in my corner. But like you mentioned also, it can be shared a little bit with problematic issues, because then the dogma can kind of say, well, you can only call on them if you're doing XYZ. Sometimes that was part of it, but I think my innate feeling was that God was always with me, that I always had that available to me. And I really developed at a pretty young age a connection with Jesus, and that connection with Jesus has always stayed with me, and has stayed with me since departing from the church. So, one of the things I find really interesting is that a lot of times spirituality, at least this has been my experience, and it's been what I've noticed in talking to other people, is that spirituality, religion, God can all kind of be put into one big pot.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering, and whoever wants to answer this, I'm just wondering how you have you been able to separate that? Was that challenging to go from that place of religion telling you who God was and what spirituality is, and kind of defining your experience, versus having that personal experience with spirituality, and kind of disconnecting that from the dogma of religion? I don't know if that question is making any sense, but jump right in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can, I did not have a clear understanding of Jesus growing up. If that is, it's amazing to say that, but the kind of Catholicism that I was brought up in, the catechism, always had Jesus on the cross dying for our sins.
Mm,
So I always had this heaviness of Jesus, that I didn't look to Jesus. I always wanted to skip over him and go to the Father, because I was like, I couldn't understand, the figure of Jesus was, was Jesus on the cross, and that was scary to me. And so I really didn't understand that, that part of, and I think it's one of the reasons why I really began pulling away that, and the dogma that said that, things like you can't use birth control, you can't be, you have to follow this, those types of things are what pulled me back. And then what you're talking about, putting it all together, I think overall, I had this feeling of what religion is, as you're saying, putting it all. So even though I didn't have my coming to Jesus, or I don't even want to say coming to Jesus, because that has its own connotation, but my deeper understanding of who Jesus was came after I left the Catholic Church, so to speak, and it was when I really began. But the formulation of being spiritual was only connected with the church, and spiritual for me was saying the rosary would have been a spiritual part, and there was no spirituality because you can only talk one way. So there was nothing coming back.
oh,
Does that make sense?
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was, you can pray to them, to the loved ones you've lost, and to the saints. We had a lot with saints, so you could pray to the saints, but you never expected to hear back from them. So that part of spirituality was never in my radar.
So it was just a one-way communication in your
Communication.
experience.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Pooja,
Yeah.
how about you? What were your thoughts about the separation between religion, spirituality, all of that?
Yes, yes, it's a great question, Julie, because for the longest time, I could not separate the two. I grew up very religious. Then I joined a church where I was extremely religious. So for like almost 37 or 38 years of my life, I just thought that, and especially in the Christian church, I just thought Jesus, God, church, Bible, there was no differentiation. There were no boundaries around anything. And the church I went to also took the leaders very seriously. So if the leaders interpreted the Bible a certain way, that was considered. That if you follow that or if you believe that, then that's spirituality, right? So spirituality even meant something as silly as being in church every time the doors were open.
Mm,
So my definition for spirituality was I did not have one. It
Mhm.
was all about religion and God. And, so it was really, really, I had to be hit on the head. I think, and I think Jesus just blew me away and knocked me over, is what I say, because I was having a very difficult time in my life one day, and it's a long story behind that. And I know I've shared that on your podcast, Julie. So this day, when I was having a nervous breakdown in my closet, I felt somebody touching me, and it was a really mystical and beautiful experience. It was on the left side of my body, and I felt like waves of electricity and heat going through me. There was like streams of consciousness coming in, and I knew it was Jesus. Like, I don't know how I know, but it's just that I knew. And when I opened my mouth to, say something, it was just overwhelming. Like I felt that love come over me. And following that, I started having mystical experiences. Every time I would call on Jesus, I would feel through my body like currents or warmth, or I started having spiritual dreams about him where I was caught up in a twister one time and my whole body became light. Or one time I was awake and I wasn't dreaming, but I felt like a whole ocean had come inside my body. So
wow.
all these really strange experiences in my body where this presence kept getting stronger. It was a very kind, extremely kind energy. And this was in stark contrast to the way God was being portrayed. Like every Sunday, I would hear, stories of judgment, like God destroyed his people, or God punished so and so, or, the wrath of God came upon so and so. So, you hear all this in your religious context. And now something had touched my spirit, and I was able to perceive another presence, the consciousness, the energy. So something had hit me on the head and woke me up. And that's when I started separating the two, that I realized that religion and spirituality are definitely not the same thing. And so since then, I always like to think of spirituality as something that's more inward, that we ask the deeper questions. And religion is something that tries to give, I think, cookie cutter answers for those questions. But whereas I think that spirituality is where each one discovers the answers themselves.
Yeah.
So now I've kind of like completely separated the two.
Wow. Yeah, thank you. Thank you both for sharing your perspective on that. And I know we could probably talk 45 minutes just on that alone, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know about you guys, but there's been a couple of times since we like, hit record that I thought this is almost like one of those jokes that starts with there was a Mormon, a Catholic, and an evangelical came and sat down on a plane, you know? It's like it's like one of those things, but I just love this discussion. I've just always been so enthralled. And I think it's funny too, because I will get on a plane. Like one time I got on this plane and there was this man who was a practicing Jew and I was so enthralled. Like I spent 2 hours asking him questions. I just like really wanted to understand his world and how he viewed things. Beautiful human being. And a couple of years ago, I got on a plane and there was this wonderful Christian young man that was on the plane next to me who had been a drug addict and had found God and found Jesus and he had this beautiful perspective on his Christian religion and I'm just always just in awe of people.
Mhm.
You know, our stories are just so important and I think when we think about for me, I think about like the soul contracts that we came before here, that we ended up in India, that we ended up in, the East in an Irish Catholic community, that I ended up in Florida in a Mormon family. Yeah, it's just so fascinating to me. I don't think there's any accidents. I think we're all exactly where we planned to be when we came here. I have, and it's part of what gives me perspective on my own experiences. And as my spirituality was shifting over the years, and I was trying to hold it all within the context of my religion, and I was allowing religion to define my experiences for me, it was getting harder and harder for me to really understand how what I was receiving from God, and both of you have shared something along these same lines, but what I was receiving from God versus what I was hearing on Sunday, and trying to make that work over time, it just stopped working. And I was struggling to make that connection. And I would find, um, you talked about the everything had to have a scripture, Pooja, right? And so in my mind, I had to find a leader or a scripture or something to validate my experiences. But over time, I was realizing there was a lot of conflict between the different, even within the context of religion, there were a lot of conflicting ideas about how to interpret things. And so I would grab a hold of this over here, I would grab a hold of this over here, and then these pieces didn't fit. So I would just kind of put them off to the side. And over time, it just became heavy to carry all of that and to understand all that. We had this discussion about Jesus, and I think Jesus is such a beautiful, um and I don't even know what word to use, but he's a beautiful person, a beautiful concept, a beautiful teaching, a beautiful example. And I often think about the scriptures about, the very elect will be deceived. And there's a lot of family members that feel like I've been, or friends even, who feel like I've been deceived because I've decided to separate myself from religion. But I recently was rethinking, and over the last probably 3 years, I've rethought all the stories of Jesus. And I've thought about maybe the deception is that we think that the answers are outside of us. Maybe the deception is that, like you said, Pooja, like that that we have all of this. Jesus said, "This you will do, and more." And I really feel like he came to embody what it means to bring our whole soul into this experience. And I had this tremendous experience with Jesus when my kids died, the day that they died, and I laid in the hospital, and I had this vision, like he came to me and he was with me, and he held my hands and he looked into my eyes, and I just felt this overwhelming peace that I can't even explain. But then I would go from that back into the realization that I'm in an emergency room, and all the beeping and all the noise and all the chaos and all the worry and all the just my mind going crazy. And then I would go back into this vision with him, and it kind of flowed back and forth while I was in the hospital, especially those first couple of hours. And I will never forget the love that he brought and the peace that he brought, and the just uh, again, overwhelming power. And I'm very, very grateful. And even though I don't follow a particular religion, I feel very connected to Jesus. And I just want to share that as part of, my experience. And I appreciate that, both of you have had experiences with Jesus as well. Bernadette?
It's interesting because again, I was saying how we were brought up, with this Catholic, and I remember, and I believe Spirit sent me in this direction. When I started to question the Catholic Church, I bought the book, The Birth of Christianity. And it was a book that was written from scholar to scholar, arguing over the different gospels. And it was so above me that I would have to read these pages over and over to try and understand. It was the first time I realized that there were more gospels than Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I had no idea. So there was so much, and that was the seed of there's more to this and there is more. And so and that's where I started to learn differently about Jesus. I started to want to know more. And I started reading about him as the mystical Jesus, as understanding that his embodiment, the only picture ever shown me was him on the cross, and to really begin to understand his stories. And that's where, that's all those, how this started, my awakening. And then of course, when David was so sick with alcoholism, and that's when I brought the
And
rose.
David was your husband.
Was my husband, yeah. And I was trying to navigate a really difficult situation that was changing all the time. And that is the first time I reached back and started using the rosary, which took me back. But I brought the rosary in with all of my ancestors sitting around a table, and Mary sitting at the table with us saying the rosary. And that's when my ancestors came to me and awakened me. I had a great aunt that came to me as a visitation, and a great great grandmother that channeled through me the rosary. But it was when I started to question, they sent me to the book. And I totally believe this, that they sent me to the book to learn more. And that's when I started to realize how this religion, the Catholic religion, had all begun to come together. And that's where I wanted the knowledge. How did they come to be teaching me all this? Because I didn't believe it all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So and that was one of the challenges for me, was that I was having all these experiences, especially after my children died, where I was having experiences with them, with their spirits. I was having experiences with my brother who had passed away years before. I was feeling these visitations with angels, and I didn't know how to put that within the context of religion, and there's so much fear about those types of experiences, and yet what I was feeling and sensing and enjoying was so beautiful and peaceful and healing and hopeful. And that I couldn't just, it was almost like, for me it was almost like I have to choose the route that my soul is bringing me, that I feel like God is taking me, or I have to stay within this space. But I had this other aha recently, because a while back, and when I was receiving messages from my angels, and they were talking about how religion is man-made, and that, if I chose to stay, that was fine. If I chose to leave, that was fine. And but they were really teaching me that it's man-made, and that we're, in a lot of ways, and this is not to vilify religion, because it has such a beautiful place in our communities. It has such a beautiful place in our history. It has so much good. That's why I wanted to start with talking about the good of it. but they were really teaching me that it's man-made, and that we're kind of giving our power away a little bit when we're, so whether we stay in religion or not, it's like keeping our personal power and trusting what we're receiving from our gods, from our guides. I'm sorry, not our gods, but from our guides, like trusting what we're receiving from God and from our guides. And but recently I had this thought, it's like, um everything around us is man-made. Like my house is man-made. The schools that the kids go to are man-made. The banks that we use are man-made. All these structures are man-made, and yet they all have good aspects, and I want to live in my house, you know. And there might come a time when I decide this house isn't a good fit for me anymore, and I might move to a different house. And so to, to look at it that way just kind of changed things a little bit for me, to realize that, yeah, these structures are very much man-made, just like whatever we choose to believe is the structure of our own experience. I don't know. I just thought that was really interesting to think of it in that way. Yeah.
I agree, Julie. I agree because it was such a struggle for me to leave. It took me
Yeah.
2 years, and having these experiences with Jesus, and I could sense that he's saying, I need to walk away from this, and I still wouldn't do it. And do you know what's funny is the only way I would do it is if he could show me a Bible verse, because that's the only way my brain
Oh,
was
yeah.
calibrated for making a decision. So it was almost in this cult-like mode, right, where you cannot think for yourself and you're always looking for this external validation and approval. And he gave it to me. It was so funny. Because I was sleeping one night in my bed, and all of a sudden I heard it in my head. And I can't remember where it is in the Bible, but he said, you don't pour new wine in old wineskin, because you're going to damage the wineskin and the new wine is going to get wasted. Right. And that helped me. And I was still so stubborn. I kept asking for more verses. And then another one popped up, and it was like, what shall it profit a man if you gain the whole world and lose your soul? And who knew that I could lose my soul in church?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Who knew that?
yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
we had some
So,
help in that process
yeah.
of moving away.
Yeah, definitely there's challenges in separating. I know from my own experience of leaving, the Mormon faith, it is such an insular community, and there are so many strict
Mhm.
um, expectations of the way that we're supposed to do this life in order to be okay in the next life, and to qualify to go to the temple, which the temple, it was equated with heaven. So if I
Mhm.
don't do X, Y, and Z, then I don't qualify to go to the temple, which essentially is equal to I don't qualify to go to heaven. But my experiences were telling me no one is restricted from heaven.
Mhm.
No one is restricted from being with their family in the next life. No one is separate from God. And that was the experiences that I was having. And yet to leave that community, then friends and family then react, because it does become, I'm sure both of you can appreciate this, it does become part of our identity, part of like who we are. And there's a lot of fear. If we think about, like, our family is traveling across country to go to California or whatever, right? And somebody turns off on the wrong highway, right? And then everyone's panicked. Wait, they're not gonna, they're going the wrong way. It's kind of that times 100 or 1,000. What were your experiences as you moved away from religion, and uh, how did you navigate that?
And I took baby steps. So I went from Catholicism to Episcopalian, which is, it really, you call it Catholic light.
I've
So
heard that before.
yeah, Yeah. And it was because I still wanted, there was that feeling of not wanting to lose religion. I wanted my kids to be experienced, to experience some of what I had experienced as a child. And to I wanted them to grow up with enough knowledge that they could go into any church in the world and feel comfortable enough to be there because they knew what church was like and going into. So that was my first, and even that's, family was already starting to say, well, that's not the Catholic Church. You know what I mean? So I was starting to get that from family members. But they were, I think, because my parents were open-minded. Pooja, like you said, your parents had some, and they were solid right into when my dad was in his 50s. And when he got to his 50s, he didn't break away from the church. They went to church every week until they died. But he broke away from the solidness of the dogma, like that thing had to. So I had a little bit of guidance, like not guidance, but permission, because they, were a little bit less pushing us to be in church be in the Catholic Church every week. So that was helpful for me. So that's kind of what began. But then the spiritual part came, that my family still doesn't understand. When I talk about that, that is still not accepted within my family. Not in a way that no one talks to me about.
Yeah, I understand that. Yes. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that.
That's hard, Bernadette. It was really brutal for me, Julie. I think the first few years, I think, were pretty brutal because it wasn't just about leaving a religion or your community. Deconstruction is painful because you're losing parts of yourself also.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I know you know all about grief because, and I will tell you, it was also some level of feeling shame because 17 years my husband and I were serving in that community, so we were part of the leadership team. So you can't help feeling like you're betraying that cause or that ministry. So there was some guilt from that. And also when we left, we were not allowed to talk to anyone because we were considered that you're deceived by the angel of light, and now you're going to become a stumbling block to the flock. We were actually told that. So we weren't even allowed to explain why we were leaving, which was very hard because the people that loved us were like, they just left. Like there's no. So there was some of that. There was some feelings of feeling betrayed. So we have to work through all these wounds, right? It's the loss, it's the wounds, and also forgiveness, right? Like learning all about how to do that in that whole process. So I think you talked about a soul contract earlier. I think I probably expedited all of my learning in the last 15 years. Whatever I needed to learn about life, I think everything hit me in the last 15 years. And so the separation was extremely painful, extremely slow. I had a lot of work that had to be done, but I feel like the universe kept nudging along. Like I would get a lot of signs. I would ask for signs because I was like a little baby and I was so afraid to think for myself, right? So I'd be like, hey, is it okay for me to do this? And slowly I stopped asking for Bible verses and I started asking for like other signs. And so, that everything happened so slowly. But I think I grew a lot from that experience. So, yeah, it wasn't easy, but it was so worth it.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, you're sharing that about leaving and not being able to explain yourself, and immediately I just felt this lack of closure,
Yeah.
Mhm.
this lack of ability to like expression is so important. And so finding another avenue, if you're listening to this and you're having that experience, because I
Yeah.
know, Pooja, that your experience, I heard your story probably a couple of years ago on you shared on a podcast, and I can remember exactly where I was because I just felt like she is sharing my story. Even though we have different backgrounds, I felt so connected to your story because of your mystical experiences and this really challenging um, period of time of separating from the church, and even having kind of the physical symptoms and all the things. And I just appreciated you so much sharing that, because I felt less alone, which is why we are doing this today. So if you're listening to this and you're finding yourself feeling a need to separate from a religious community because it no longer feels healthy for you to be a part of that, that was definitely part of my experience. Really take good care of yourself, a lot of self-care, a lot of extra rest. Find places where you can express yourself, even if that's in a journal, if that's just in speaking out loud into the ethers, talking to God, talking to your angels. Find ways to express yourself so that you can move through that, because it's really challenging when you don't feel like you have a place where it's safe. I read something recently that said good theology and good mental health are correlated. And so and I just, that is so spot on for
Mhm.
me, because I started to feel like about 3 years ago, I realized something is just not healthy here.
Mhm.
Something is not healthy here. And I'm not necessarily pointing at the church and saying it's the church. I realized that it was just in the way that I was giving away my power and looking to other people to validate me and my spiritual experiences, validate me and that I'm okay. Bernadette, I can really appreciate what you said about like your family not really understanding this kind of the esoteric, experience of spirituality, the mystic experience of spirituality certainly has been my experience too. And that was part of my need to move forward, because I felt like I kind of had to choose the path of God, which sounds crazy, or the path of religion. And I felt God moving me forward in mediumship, in
Mhm.
doing these types of talking about angels, teaching about angels, talking about that spirit communication was just really important and felt like it was part of my soul contract. And so I couldn't deny that piece.
What you just brought up for me is I ended up in a place, I think, and this was before David got sick, that I wasn't in a vast, desert or anything, but I didn't have this, I didn't have the spiritual connection that I had had. And I believe, but I was still seeking, still looking for books, and you were saying, to anybody listening, I kept asking, show me the next book that you want me to read. Show me, keep me on this path, because I wanted to believe in the connection and I wanted a connection, a deeper connection with God and a deeper connection with Jesus. And I felt those were still back at the Catholic Church. And
Mm,
I didn't really know how to pray. And that's why I started saying the rosary when I was in the throes of chaos and everything else, because I didn't know how. I had lost my ability to pray. And so the rosary gave me, and I heard a medium actually say, John Edward, he's an East Coast medium. And John had said that before he went out to work with an audience or be with an audience, he would say the rosary. And I was like, I can do that. I remember how to do that. And that gave me the ability to begin to pray and to connect. And that is what opened me up. It's where, when my ancestors, I opened to Jesus in that time, but not Jesus on the cross, Jesus, but through the stories and understanding him, the message that he was bringing. And then a guide came to me. So it was being able to let go, not only to let go and say no, or just to put that aside, but to allow myself to be open to what was starting to come in, because
yeah.
that scary too.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, when you're experiencing something that's outside of the boundaries of what you've learned from, a religious context or somebody that is put forward as a religious authority, and then you start having these experiences that are beyond that, and then you start wondering if and I don't know, I would love to hear you guys' perspective on this, but I've had these experiences where I've kind of disconnected a little bit. I've kind of pulled back, and I was like, I would receive all these angel messages and so forth, and then I would kind of separate from that a little bit. I think it was a part of not wanting, I don't, it was kind of that, like, is this real? Because it's so easy to pick up this pen and go, this is real. But then you're having these experiences that feel unexplainable, but also undeniable. And so I would find myself kind of pulling back from that spiritual connection. But invariably, I would feel sad. I would feel down. I would it just didn't feel good. And then when I would reconnect, it just felt so good. And so I had to, like, look at that and say, okay, what feels good? What feels correct? What feels peaceful, helpful, hopeful, healing, and choose that route. Has that
Mhm.
can what has your experience been with that, Pooja? Because I feel like you've kind of had some of the same, like, experiences, like disconnecting. Because a lot of times when people disconnect from religion, they also disconnect from God. I've seen that
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I'm just
Yeah.
And
curious what your
I think that would have been me if I had not had that mystical experience, because my mental health was so compromised. Even if Jesus hadn't come to me, I would have still left. But then I would have left and not known what to do. But I'm so grateful that I had that mystical experience because that carried me. But and I'm so sorry, Julie, I forgot your question.
that's
Oh,
okay.
about when you disconnect and you come back. So, one thing I started realizing, like every time I would be this new person in this new space with what I say a new Jesus, I would often slip back into my old ways. Like I'm trying to pray hard, I'm trying to read the Bible again, I'm trying to do all the things I would do when I was in the church. And what I found when I would do that, I would actually get depressed. And
Mm,
it's not until I would again steer myself back to this new energy, this new space. And I think that was happening because the soul was expanding. And
yeah.
I think it's back to that verse, that you can't pour new wine in an old wineskin. And I think once you expand, it's hard to get back inside the box if you're
Mhm.
having these new experiences. But I also think it takes time for the new experiences to become the new you. And that
Mhm.
interim is really hard. It's like a tug of war.
Yeah.
It
That
really
was,
is that liminal space where you're trying to
yeah,
figure out what is the new path? What is the new
yeah,
path? Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's where you're talking about the tug of war kind of where you go back and forth, where one minute you're really believing in that spiritual moment, and but then you fall back into, I'm crazy. Somebody's gonna, this, and you
I'm
think that.
fooling myself. I'm nuts. I tell people that all the time. I'm a little crazy, and that's okay.
Yeah, well, and I think that, my family, it's like she's still grieving. It's like when they see this spiritual side, it is like, oh, this is her response to grief. And so it's like a pat on the shoulder, like it's okay. You can believe that, we're okay with you, but instead of really believing with me,
Mm.
it is more
yeah.
so
It's really interesting that you say that, Bernadette, because it's true, and it's not just other people not believing. Sometimes the hard thing about us believing our own experiences. And this is the curious story that actually led me to IANS, because I was sharing this with someone that was in my nutrition program, and I trusted her, and I was telling her how hard it is for me to believe in my experiences. And she suggested IANS. She's like, you'll find people like you there. There are plenty of people like you over there. And so I'm grateful I found you, boo.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny that you say that because a couple of years ago, when I went to my very first online IONS group, it was like my whole body just relaxed. I felt totally accepted and loved, and there was nothing I was going to say that was going to surprise anybody. I just felt overwhelmingly joyful to be in this open spiritual space that would allow me to explore and
Mm.
to be the seeker that I am without the fear element. And I think that's one of the things that I really encourage people is to, let go of the fear and just allow yourself to explore. I, I I think from my background, part of what I I believed for a long time was that it was almost like God was hiding from us in this weird way. It was almost like, the world was such a fearful place, and we had to be really careful or we would be deceived, and that it was like I had to jump through 100 hoops to be able to find God, to be able to have that connection, to be able to have a spirit connection. And what I've discovered is God's not hiding at all. The angels aren't hiding at all. They're right here. They want us to hear them. They want to help us. They want to provide that hope and that help.
Yeah.
And that has been just such a joyful thing
Mhm.
to open up to. What have been some of the things that you have found has been helpful to you as you've let go of maybe some of the um, maybe old fears or old dogmas that weren't serving you?
I would say the thing that's most helpful, and we talked about this before, is that how good it feels to be in the moment, like in the space, and once you learn that, you can't go back to not wanting it. That it is, and I teach that to people that I work with. I'm like, once you learn, it's really, um, and I think that has been, so now I can understand that there are times we have to be in this 3D world. You have to go to the grocery store, put the laundry in, do those kinds of things. And we sometimes lose, we don't always lose that feeling, but we sometimes lose that feeling when we have to do those things. But and I don't even know if I'm answering the question correctly, but that
No, right or
feeling,
wrong.
that, that feeling of being connected with spirit in as one is incredibly powerful. And I believe that they are, as you said, they're always all around us, and that they are trying to get all of us on the planet to get the, that would be the ultimate goal. But for now, they know that they got three here in this, in this Hollywood Squares. But
Yes, we're definitely seekers. Yes. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. What'd you
no,
say?
no, no. But that's really what it's that, I don't know, it's that feeling. That's what was coming up.
Yeah, it's the
I'm gonna
remembering.
piggyback on that, Bernadette, because that's something I've had to be very intentional sometimes about practicing. Because, like you said, if you have a day where you're doing all the chores and all your work and everything, it's very easy to lose that feeling or that connection. So taking time, whether it's my meditation isn't usually like a guided meditation. I just sit in my backyard and watch the trees and calm myself, and then I try to reconnect with that feeling. So that's definitely a big part of it. But also connecting with others that have been on similar journeys. I think that fuels us. Like right now, I feel very fueled,
Yes.
talking to you both.
Yeah.
And then what I started doing was one way of connecting with that was I started listening to stories, like podcasts and things where people were having similar experiences. And one thing particularly interests me is where people have near-death stories of Jesus and the way they describe him. That
Mhm,
energy feels very similar to what I felt. So
mhm.
again, it's kind of like a validation. And then writing, like different things just to practice the new self, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Change the wiring in here.
Change the wiring. Great. That's exactly what it is.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah,
exactly.
we're always exploring, we're always seeking, and I think, just taking the fear out of seeking and allowing ourselves to go in the direction that spirit is flowing, that spirit is calling and leading us, and that's the beauty of everything that we're
And
here to do is remember
yeah,
who we are. That's what Jesus, to me, that's what Jesus came down here to show us who we are.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's okay too, because sometimes people we just were talking about the fear thing. It is okay to go in a direction and then hit and feel a little bit nervous or anxious about that and come back. And then maybe either go, if it really felt like, okay, this isn't the right way, go in a different direction, or just give yourself time to integrate what you've learned and then again and move forward. Because Pooja, as you said, this doesn't happen quickly. I mean, my ancestors came to me in 2013, and my guide came to me in 2020, and they've been with me for like really. So but all during that whole time, I was still connected with the ancestors, but the process was not. It didn't happen really, really quickly for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it certainly hasn't happened very quickly for me because Pooja, you talk about, for 37, 38 years. And I was like, okay, well, I'm like 15 years, well, 22 years behind you on this journey. So, so I, I appreciate that, recognizing that that there's nothing wrong with the path we're on. If we're Bernadette, you talked about ritual. There's something really beautiful about
Mm.
ritual. There really is something beautiful about that, and honoring how each of us connect to the divine. And I truly believe God honors all of that. Source honors every way that we seek and that we choose to connect. And yeah, ritual can be very important. And it's okay to be wherever you're at, and to allow yourself to seek and to be open-minded. And like you said, Bernadette, it's exploring. And when something resonates, you move in that direction. And if it doesn't resonate, you move in a different direction. And I've
Mhm.
found in my own journey that there's been times where I've come across material and I've gone, that doesn't resonate with me. That doesn't feel right. And then I've gone in another direction. And then as I've learned over here, then it's
Mhm.
brought me back over here. Like I was ready for this piece now. And so
Yeah.
now it resonates. There may be some things that will never resonate with me, and that's okay,
Mhm.
and other things that I will learn to appreciate as I go forward in my journey. So,
It is putting it, and I read this in a book, in putting it in the category of not that you don't believe it, but I don't believe it yet.
yeah.
Letting it
Oh.
sit there so that it is that you don't, and you just don't believe it yet, but you're open to seeing, or just even leaving it there, and let it until you end up on another side and go, oh, that connects. Oh, like you just, yeah.
All of a sudden, the puzzle piece fits in that didn't
Yes.
fit in before. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. As we close, is there anything else that you would like to share with everyone, and also share where they can connect with you? Pooja, you want to share with us first?
Sure, Julie. The one thing that I want to share with everyone is the one lesson I'm learning over and over and over. Please don't forget to sing your own song.
Mhm.
You are the expert of you. And the intuition is your most important weapon that you brought into this world to help you survive when you were a baby, I've been in classrooms with babies and toddlers, and their intuitions and instincts are just fine. So, because I didn't have that for the longest time, it was suppressed. So that's a lesson that was hard for me to learn. So if you're on that path, please, trusting yourself is very, very hard, but especially, if you've been conditioned otherwise. So please know that it's very, very important, because we're all here. Our energies are here. We're all here. And if we don't do who we are, I think that somehow we're messing up that big picture painting, or that big puzzle that all fits together, because Julie's Julie, Pooja's Pooja, and Bernadette is Bernadette. So that's my thing. And you can find me, my podcast, and everything I do on my website, www.poojachilukuri.com.
Awesome. Thank you, Pooja. I love that. Trust your intuition, develop that intuition, allow it to shine. I love that. Thank you. Bernadette?
And I would say those that are listening, often we need stories, we need somebody else's experience in order to understand what we are going through, and to keep coming back to the podcast or to the books that are resonating with you to help you integrate what you're beginning to learn, and not to be afraid. This is a very safe space. There are a lot of really safe spaces to learn. IANS is a safe space to learn. And so allow yourself that there are a lot of crazy things. And I had a client come to me once and just said they had been at one podcast, and it really scared them. So trust your intuition, like Pooja just said. Trust your intuition, and know that we all started where you are now. And so just to join us in this conversation. And you can find me. My company is Tell Me Our Story Ancestral Healing, and my website is tellmeourstory.com. And it's from the point of view of the child asking the parent to tell me our story. So that's where you can lots of information.
Thank you so much for being on the show today, for sharing your wisdom, for sharing your journey. This has been a fascinating conversation. I've loved every minute of it. I just knew that you two were the perfect people to come on and talk about this topic, and separating or discussing this intersection between spirituality and religion, and when it doesn't fit anymore, what do we do, right? And so thank you so much. I appreciate you so much, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.